Welcome, everyone, to today's pre-AGM discussion. We're the 2nd of December 2024. This is the Internet Society UK chapter. And we've got our AGM in about 1 hour's time. But prior to that, we thought we'd have a quick small discussion with both people, members of the board who are here, and also with the people in the room, and of course, anyone following remotely regarding internet governance in its many different aspects. Internet governance being not only about the internet, but mostly these days so much about those international processes taking place, not only in ICANN, but also at, well, used to be the ITU, but now at the UN itself, the Internet Governance Forum, a whole number of things taking place at the moment, everything moving at the same time. Of course, we know that the world is in this very somehow unstable phase at the moment. Lots of changes, so it'll be interesting to hear from people about this as well. And for this, I guess I should just have a throw over to Kim. I should just introduce, but looking, I'm going to have Anna the chair of the chapter. That's Matthew Shears, board member of the director of ISOC UK, and the person sitting at the far end of the table.
Yes, my name is Desiree Milosevic. I'm also a board member of the UK chapter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe we should just go. We haven't got many people at the moment in the room, but we just hand the mic quickly to those people who are there.
Well, I'm Pradeep Gupta, and I'm very excited to be here. Let me see what kind of discussions will take place over here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. And you as well?
Thank you. So my name is Brian Chuma. I am a member of England Internet Society and a PhD student on internet governance at King's. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And there'll be more people joining us, no doubt, pretty soon. And we'll see if we have time to introduce them at the time. But online, we've got several people as well at the moment. Do you want to quickly go on a quick roundup? Nigel?
Thank you, Nigel Hickson. I work for a decent Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and I work on internet governance.
Thanks, Nigel. Mike Blanche?
Thanks, Olivia. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Blanche. I was at Google for many years. I'm now an independent consultant working on a number of different topics, including ITU stuff.
Great to see you here. Thank you very much, Mike. And I see Andrew Campling has also joined us.
Hi, Andrew Campling. I run 419 Consulting, and I'm interested in all things governance and internet standards.
Thanks very much. And I can see more people jumping in. Okay, we're going to get moving because I see more people are joining, and I hope the sound is good. So, Matthew, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Olivier.
So I'm just going to introduce the main topic, I think, for me, and I'm perhaps going to talk about some of the UK specific policy issues. I'm just going to provide some food for thought on the WSIS, SDGs, UN processes that we're all, I suspect, a little bit concerned about or just want to know more about. And then certainly, Nigel, others, please don't hesitate to jump in. This is my take, of course. But anyway, let me jump in because I think this is an important one. So I want to talk about, I'm going to take a step back and not just talk about WSIS and talk about what I think are 5 key things that we have to bear in mind when we're thinking about WSIS and the IGF and beyond, which is really a point I want to emphasize. So there are 5 things I think that we need to think about. One of which is the WSIS, of course. We're coming up on WSIS plus 20. The WSIS obviously is the place from which the IGF was born, and effectively, there are also a whole series of action lines that are very important to accomplishing what the WSIS was intended to do. And so that's one piece of this. And the WSIS review will be in 2025. And that will basically look at what has been accomplished so far and what might be taken forward. And of course, as a part of that is the IGF renewal. The second big bucket in this complex kind of space that we're working in are the Sustainable Development Goals. These have been around for a while. The action lines from the WSIS are supposed to feed into the achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. There is some synchronicity there. I think it's fair to say, and I think the Secretary General said this himself, is that the Sustainable Development Goals have not necessarily delivered what was intended. Achieving them has been particularly difficult. In fact, in September 2023, he recognized that only 15% of the SDGs were on track. And some people believe that his push for the Global Digital Compact was in part to spur on the SDGs or to find another space in which he could actually see some kind of progress. The third bucket is how the digital world has changed. And this is going to have an impact in terms of the WSIS action lines and other things, and I'll come back to that. And in particular, the one big issue here is AI. This is one that the UN is really focused on, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But digital developments, how different are they from the WSIS days, and how important are these new developments in terms of the things that we have to consider going forward? That's bucket number 3. Bucket number 4 is the famous Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future incorporates the Global Digital Compact, incorporates the Pact of the Future actions, if you will, and also incorporates a declaration on future generations or for future generations. How that evolves, how the IGF is dealt with, how stakeholderism and multi-stakeholderism is dealt with within the Digital Compact and within the Pact for the Future is another key bucket. And then finally, we have the role of the UN. A lot of people have been concerned about the increasing interest of the UN in dealing with some of these digital developments, and particularly in the space of AI. We have a tech envoy who is quite vocal, and there is this other issue, which is an issue of where are these decisions being taken in this process? And when you think about all these buckets, how much is it going to be in New York? How much of a centralization will there be in New York versus Geneva? And we know from past experience, the many years that we've been involved in this, is that the access for civil society and for stakeholders generally in Geneva is far better than it is in New York. And this has an impact. So how do these things come together? There is, in the WSIS Plus 20 review, which is going to be next year, there are going to be some asks, most likely, to adapt or change or evolve some of the action lines. The CSCD is going through this set of meetings at the moment where it's encouraging input and everything. There have been 3 or 4 meetings, or a couple more to go. And these are opportunities where stakeholders can actually input what's been achieved, what has been a success, what's not been a success, what more needs to be done. And that's certainly one of the areas where this community needs to become involved. So that's the action lines piece of it. What will come out of WSIS Plus 20 in terms of the action lines, and how will they or might they evolve? And will people be asking for new and different action lines? I think there's going to be, I would imagine there'll be quite a lot of debate around that. The other piece, of course, of WSIS is the IGF, multi-stakeholder approaches, and then enhanced cooperation. As I'm sure many of you are aware, enhanced cooperation has been a bit of a bugbear for this community. It seems to be back on the agenda. It's not clear to what degree it's going to be an issue going forward, whether or not certain countries will push for it to be elevated. So that's a bit of a question mark. The issue of the IGF, of course, is the other big piece of this. There are many in this community who are concerned about the future of the IGF. What will happen? Will it get renewed? And how will it evolve over time? I'm less concerned about that. There are a significant number of statements throughout various UN documents and in the GDC and the Pact for the Future as well about the value of the IGF and its likely renewal. And I think I'm certainly hopeful that it will be renewed. So these are the question marks, if you will, from the WSIS 20 going forward. What happens in terms of evaluating its success? How will possibly these action lines evolve to match better with the SDGs? How will they help the SDGs? What's the future of enhanced cooperation? What's the future of the IGF? So those are some of the kind of the dynamics at play here. When it comes to the SDGs, I think the action lines and the SDGs will obviously be a big focus. one of the questions is going to be how much actual progress has been made in the action lines? How much have those action lines, if you recall, their purpose is to create a people-centered, inclusive, and development-oriented information society. That was one of the key things that came out of WSIS. And I think there'll probably be quite a robust discussion as to what degree those action lines have actually helped make that happen. How aligned and how relevant are they to the SDGs going forward? So that's that's my kind of perspective in terms of where that'll be. Digital developments, AI, big issue. We saw the focus on it in the GDC. We know that there is an AI report out of the UN high-level group. This is very likely to be one of those critical areas for debate in the WSIS 20. And it's not actually anywhere clearly identified in the action lines because the action lines really, to a large degree, predate AI. So there'll be debate, no doubt, about how do we incorporate AI into the action lines and what will the relevance be. Actual SDGs themselves, there's a huge expectation that much more will be achieved going into the actual 2030 and realizing the SDG 2030 agenda. How much will actually be accomplished, I think, is something that's going to have to be, it will be a matter of debate as well. So many of these issues, as you can see, I'm bringing in a whole number of issues, but many of them are not purely internet governance, but they will, to a greater or lesser degree, have an impact on internet governance as we go forward. Pact for the Future, GDC Declaration, I think it's called, on future generations. These documents, I encourage you, if you haven't read them, to really look at them carefully. And I know there's been a lot of concern about the inability of this community to input into those documents. But if you look through those documents, there are a number of good references and good points of leverage for this community. There are numerous references to civil society, an abundance of references to human rights. There are references to multi-stakeholder approaches, to stakeholders, to relevant stakeholders, to all stakeholders. There's a huge amount in those documents that we can leverage to bring about reinforcing the need for the IGF to go forward and to reinforce multi-stakeholder approaches. So I think there's real value in looking at those closely and saying, we recognize that in these documents, there are these kind of statements about the internet community and stakeholders. How do we leverage those? How do we build on those statements and make the most of them? Now, a lot of people look at the Pact of the Future and are wary of it. I would take a different perspective. I would say that we have an opportunity to leverage it. So that's something for debate. And then finally, the kind of fourth bucket, but a fifth bucket, which is really the role of the UN. A couple of things here. We've seen that AI has really brought about an increasing interest by the UN in terms of what their role can be in this. I think that's in part because of the opportunity and the threats, of course, but also because of the perception that AI could be a game changer in reaching some of the goals of the SDGs as well. And this is why you see the UN also we see it with the tech envoy trying to put in place somebody who's going to centralize some functionalities and some focus in the UN. But also we see it through the AI report, the high-level group on AI. Those are places where the real focus is going to be for the debate that we're going to see over the next couple of years. None of this is going to end with WSIS 20, right? This is a debate that's going to go through 2030. We cannot, I don't believe, think that everything's going to get resolved next year. I think that everything from next year on is going to be critical. And the more that this community, in my perception, the more that this community actually steps out of a defensive mode and steps into a proactive mode, I think the better our chances of achieving what we would want to do, not only in terms of multi-stakeholder approaches, but also in terms of Internet Governance Forum, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my brief overview, or maybe not so brief. So happy to turn it over to, I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of add to this, Desiree or Olivier, or you've been at the last ICANN meeting, maybe some food for thought?
We're being too kind with each other. Shall we ask Desiree first, or?
Okay, good. Well, everything we heard from Matthew just suggests that we have a very busy time, especially next year, because there are a multitude of events within several, not only UN agencies, but there are different processes that are taking place in different venues as well. And that makes it really hard to follow. But I think it's important maybe just to say that within this World Summit of the Information Society, the review is taking place already. There was a call on 18th of this month, and then there will be an input, the OCP, the open consultation process, by March this year. I think there is also the second meeting will also take place at the IGF in Riyadh. You can follow that online if you're not there. And then there will be a third meeting in Geneva between 10 and 21st of February, really looking at WSIS action lines, as Matthew has said, what is missing from these action lines. For example, I think I could say that gender was not an issue in 2003 and 2005, but now we have the gender recognized in the SDGs, in the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm sure there will be some changes to the WSIS action lines, but they're very good. The whole process was bottom-up process for WSIS. Governments agreed what the issues were, and the stakeholders also working together on several action lines. So yes, there isn't much time between now and July. There will be a fourth meeting as well in 12th and 13th of February in Paris that will look at the WSIS action lines. And the final brief will then take place in Geneva on 10th of June. And of course, there is the WSIS itself, the event between 7th and 11th of July. So this is just taking the first bucket of which Matthew spoke about. But I think it's important to say that as technical community, we have been very active in raising the voice of supporting the multi-stakeholder model, because despite all the complexities and challenges, it could sometimes look that it's not as fast and efficient. And the multi-stakeholder model or approach to internet governance is led by organizations such as ICANN, the IETF, the IGF is an example, another example. So it's very important that it gets renewed. And we don't have a crystal ball, but I see no reason why it shouldn't be renewed. It ought to be renewed, the WSIS Forum as well as the IGF. And yeah, I could perhaps stop here and we'll see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I haven't followed that process as closely as I should have. There's so much else going on, both in the UK and also in ICANN matters. But one of the concerns that was around in the early days was whether there was a sort of sinister reason for some other things taking place at the moment to be moved to New York, whether the WSIS Plus 20 was going to be affected by this as well in a sort of negative way, or the sort of impact that you would have on that. Is there a grand plan out there in your view, or are we still just at this level where, well, there's still a lot going on, and at the moment the mood is everyone wants to work in a productive way?
I would like to add that perhaps it's, as Olivier has mentioned, it's important to know there are these processes in Geneva that we looked at that taking place online. You don't have to be there in person. You can also put your thoughts, that's the idea, and participate. But in terms of follow-up, you bring an important issue. We are not familiar as a community with for example, processes that have been put forward by the Global Digital Compact. The stakeholder community has been consulted, but I think it leaves too much to be improved, such as transparency of record and understanding how all these contributions have made it finally into this GDC. When you talk about Geneva, we have the Commission for Science, Technology and Development, CSTD, that has done the review in 2015. So now they already met at the session in October, and they will have a working group on data governance. With AI, I think it's more difficult, as you have said, Olivier, because the Office of the Tech Envoy, which is based in New York, but they do have a person in Geneva as well, Isabella del Criado, is something that seems a little bit far-reaching, at least from my point of view.
Isn't it?
There will be a new office according to the Global Digital Compact, more staff in New York, and the ways of working are different, I think. And that's even we were not familiar with most of the processes. One maybe not final thing, but remark is that the GDC, this Global Digital Compact that has been signed at the UNGA in September, is undergoing a process of endorsement, looking for bodies that have participated there to send their endorsement of the visions and principles. And there will be an implementation map. I think for me, the most interesting thing is how is that interacting with this process? What are these hooks where the GDC is going to interact? At the CSTD meeting, you will have seen that the so-called the GDC implementation map will become an annex of the CSTD WSIS Plus 20 report. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. We do actually have Nigel Hickson who has put his hand up. So, Nigel, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, good evening. And sorry for not being there. It looks like a nice room with a Christmas tree in the corner and very festive. Yeah, no, I have no great disagreements or spurts of originality, really. Just a couple of comments on what has been said, which is obviously very true, so to speak. On the action lines, yeah, I mean, clearly, I think there's going to be some tension on what happens to the WSIS action lines. I think, realistically, negotiation of each action line will not take place. I suspect in the resolution that comes out of the General Assembly, there'll be a nod perhaps to the need for perhaps additional action lines or a reformation of them, and perhaps it will be a recommendation to set up some sort of group under the UNCSTD or something like that. Put something on gender perhaps could be in there, but we'll have to see. On enhanced cooperation, this notion that obviously cropped up in the Global Digital Compact and was discussed there, I dare say it will come up again in the WSIS Plus 20 review process. So I think already, realistically speaking, and I didn't say this in public, in public, but governments might have to be quite relaxed about yet another working group to look at enhanced cooperation or something. But I can't see what else no one is going to say we're in favour of enhanced cooperation or against it, because no one really understands what it means. So got some further process to look at it might be acceptable, I suppose, in the long run. One comment, IGF, I think Matthew is right. I mean, to me, just personally, I think what came out to the GDC in terms of references to the IGF was quite gratifying. I had thought that we might not get that at all, so I do think that's really great. And as long as the IGF in a couple of weeks' time is a success, I don't see a great issue with the mandate. What I do see is an issue with the structure. Perhaps, I mean, you might know, or you might have heard that a letter, and I haven't seen this letter, has been sent to the chair of the IGF leadership panel, essentially sort of terminating the role of the leadership. I don't know whether this is surprising or not. I mean, the leadership panel was set up to have a certain mandate, but certainly this has caused a degree of consternation in the community. And so we have to see what happens with that. If the UN can just simply terminate the leadership panel, what about the MAG? So I think there are still some concerns on the voluntarism. And just finally on next steps, if you're right here, I mean, nothing, the WSIS Plus 20 is the landmark, but it's not going to end the debate. What I think could be significant is sometimes we say, well, it doesn't matter what's in a recommendation because it's only words anyway, and sometimes bears fruit. I mean, we've had words in recommendations before. When you look back and then you think, God, that didn't come into effect. But sometimes words in recommendations do have effect. And with the ITU plenipotentiary in 2026, we could see bad, well, I say bad, subjective, but we could see wording in the recommendations being picked up. So there's a possible indication there.
Commissioner, this, Nigel, we do have also some comments in the room. I don't know whether you wanted to opine on this. Actually, I just wanted to come in on what Nigel was saying about language. We have a tendency to kind of look at these, in this community, to look at these UN documents and not necessarily make the most of the language that's there. So, for example, in the principles section of the Global Digital Compact, there are references to multi-stakeholder approaches. There are references to all the other stakeholders, all stakeholders. There is even a statement that says our cooperation will be multi-stakeholder and harness the contributions of all. I think it's incumbent upon us, this community more broadly, to leverage those statements, to use those statements to our advantage because they're there. And so sometimes we can look at the compact as a whole and say, well, it's not that great, but actually there is a lot in there that we can work with. We just have to find the opportunity to leverage it, particularly as it's in the principles, etc. And also, I recommend that people look at the Declaration on Future Generations, because there's language in there that's quite interesting, where it talks of promoting a whole of society approach, and it refers to all the stakeholders again. So I think there's lots of opportunity if we think cleverly about how we leverage the language that's existing. Just to build on what you were saying, Nigel.
Yeah,
Thanks very much for this. I see. So first we have Rich Wickham in the room,
and then was a very country and afterwards.
let's turn over to Rex. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. I just wondered if this concept of the renewal or continuing of the IGF, is that really just happening due to momentum, or is it people who think, wow, what a great impact it's had, we've got to keep it, it's going to contribute so much more? Is it just trundling on of its own accord, or is there actually a real desire to continue it? Well, it's been some time since I've been to an IGF. But what I would say is that if you look at what's been said about the IGF, again, coming back to some of the documentation that inputs into all these various processing, there's nowhere where it's been negative or questioning the value of the IGF. It usually is termed in the way of it being a positive thing. So I think in that sense, there's a recognition that this is going to continue. Now, the actual structure, whatever that Olivier was mentioning, perhaps it may change, but the value of a multi-stakeholder space for internet governance is clearly stated in these documents. So I think I'm hoping that we can assume that will be continued, but the actual format, structure, maybe they will be up for discussion.
I think, Ben, a lot of people are hoping that the recent IGF will continue. It is part of the original WSIS. It is the core of internet governance. Then it certainly is a way for internet to continue being governed in a multi-stakeholder fashion. So if that was to be discontinued, I think that might be first a very worrying trend, worrying message to those people that are involved with this. And I'm not quite sure, I've certainly not heard of anything being ready to replace it in any way. No. And I'm not quite sure how that would go down with the community involved if it was just told, well, sorry, no, we're not continuing with it. I see a couple of people online. We're going to go in the queues. First is Andrew Campling.
All right. Thanks for those interesting comments, and I won't claim anything like as much knowledge as Matthew or dare I say, Nigel. But maybe just to throw a sort of question mark into the room, I want to say this as an IGF enthusiast. I will be in Riyadh Friday week, actually, come around quite quickly all of a sudden, which is good. Relevant, or is it losing relevance? So, for example, call just now was talking about a number of things, not least of which for example, some of the legislation that's coming into effect in Australia, and maybe similar legislation coming in France and possibly even Germany, to do with things like aid verification, so on. So are the conversations about fundamental things to do with governance happening in other places, or possibly governments just getting too impatient with a lack of progress in certain areas, and quite do my view certainly the imbalance between benefits and harms, which swung in the wrong direction over the last few years. So I'm a fan of multi-stakeholder, but is the IGF either losing relevance or positive help? What does it need to do to maintain its relevance? I don't know if your thoughts on that.
Andrew, I was just saying that I don't have a direct answer for you, but what I would hope is that the IGF is a space where those discussions can occur, where you can have those differing voices. And on some of the issues, as you say, the benefits and the harms, the IGF is a perfect place for that conversation to happen. If it's not been teed up, it should be teed up, because I can see a huge value in that.
That's right.
Yes, it is a very good question. How it's all going to, let's say, improve, and what the multi-stakeholder advisory group is working on, and what the community is inputting to evolve the IGF. But I certainly think that the IGF has become the flagship project of the UN in terms of its openness and how these topics of regulation can be discussed in an open way. And we certainly need to keep that openness so that the discussions can take place. The legislations will continue to take place on a national level, some of them. And therefore, it just shows the necessity of discussing this from a multiple points of view.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for the really informative overview. There's many things going on here that I only have a very light knowledge about. My question is about what happens as we get towards 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and the comment Matthew made about the concern about reaching those goals. 2030 is not that long away in terms of meeting some of those very ambitious goals. What might we be looking out for, and what might replace them, and what might come next that may impact our community as 2030 approaches, and what should we be looking at? Thank you.
Mike, it's a critical question. I would certainly hope, I'm just putting this out there, that there is an increased alignment between the action lines and the SDGs. And there's increased effort to ensure that we're all working in whatever capacity, the goal of achieving those SDGs. I think, frankly, it's in all of this community's interest to do so. I think it would be unrealistic to say that we're going to meet the SDGs by 2030, but I think the imperative is not so much that they be seen as an end goal, but they be seen as a continuing aspirational goal going forward. And I think this community has a lot to offer. I think one of the things that's always I've found a bit disappointing about the internet community is it's not made a sufficient attempt to quantify the benefit that the internet and its application and use brings towards meeting those SDGs. It's never really been, as far as I can see or have read, adequately articulated. And I think we as a community would benefit significantly from doing that, because it would show that the contribution through the processes that we're so fond of, and multi-stakeholder approaches and everything else, are actually having an impact. And I think it's something that the community might want to think about, being more articulate and more persuasive about the value that the internet brings in achieving the SDGs. Just my thought.
Khan, Ice Hockey Standing Group. I wanted to actually respond to a couple of the points that, Andrew made, and then in the previous discussion about taking advantage of the language of multi-stakeholderism in the GDC document and so on. So I think initially, and I think Nigel and I had a conversation about this 2 years ago during the UK IGF, that the value of having the Internet Governance Forum, the Global Internet Governance Forum, was never for it to be a policymaking body that actually translated itself into something that was enforceable. At that level, it cannot. It was meant to be a forum for those sorts of discussions to be able to take place. And there's a reason why we have the national and the regional versions of these forums as well, is because obviously we think about spheres of influence, you have much more control and much more access to legislative and political elements
at the national level at the UK IGF, which is where, and I think if you look back to what's been on the agenda for the UK IGF and Eurodig, you will find things like age verification and so on that might be very relevant, but being part of that agenda. And we have that's basically what led to, in effect, perhaps indirectly, although I don't really know if there's a way to quantify it, things like the online safety bill and so on. So I think that's the value of the global program, which is where regulators can come together and discuss, or of course they might have their own cooperation for that. But I think it's quite valuable nevertheless to have the multi-stakeholder discussions of those policies at the global level. So that I think is something that usually tends to get a bit lost because we think of UN institutions as like these global lawmaking institutions when they don't necessarily have to be. So that was on Andrew's point, which I think is a very welcome question, and it helps with the restatement of this point. Going back to the initial discussion, though, of the language of multi-stakeholderism and the Global Digital Compact talking about that, I would tend to disagree a little bit, because if we look at the GDC process overall, and I think I made a comment about this in this year's UK IGF, there was a term that was introduced to me, which is multi-stakeholder washing, right? In effect, it's like governments who have a particular intention or a particular agenda will probably co-opt the language of multi-stakeholderism without necessarily making it effective, right? And I think strengthening the language in these documents, or at least providing a little bit more detail about in what sense multi-stakeholderism is intended to be enforced in these contexts, is more helpful. So sure, we can take advantage of the fact that the word is there, but the devil lies in the details. And it'll be up to us to push for, perhaps in the future, given which way the wind blows, very forcefully, our understanding of a multi-stakeholder dialogue that is actually meaningful as opposed to purely participatory, just like what the GDC process, in some eyes at least, especially from the youth perspective, tended to be. So there's a couple of points, no questions, but just happy to be part of the discussion. Elizabeth?
Yeah, it's a good point that you raised, because I think some of us that participate in these bodies that do practice multi-stakeholder approach to the internet, we know that we expect all stakeholders to have an opinion, voices to be heard, and they're part of the policy development process itself. And then you have this other, let's say, many other models where the only consultation that takes place is actually labeled as a fully multi-stakeholder process. And as you say, I think it's important to realize that when we think about multi-stakeholder model, that we are really looking at all stakeholders engaging in the policy making. That does not happen at the IGF. That is not to be confused with that. But as you have said, the GDC has consulted along the way of their decision making and tried to make some opening for the input. But this process must be improved either by the Net Mundial principles to really see whether it's fully multi-stakeholder or an open consultation.
No, I agree with your points entirely. I think the issue of language is very much what we make of it. If we leverage the language in the GDC and say, this is how we understand, this is what we understand it means, and this is how we believe it should be implemented or used, then I think there's value to that. Right now, it's sitting there and we're not trying to do something with it. My point is, we should be doing something with it. But I agree entirely.
What are the next steps for this, and especially what are the next steps for the chapter? Are we to be involved in some way? Is there anything that this community can do? I know that the UK, with Nigel and others in the UK internet community, are very much involved in the process and are following this closely. Is there anything that we as an organization can do?
I think as Desiree mentioned, there are opportunities. I think there is an opportunity to contribute to the ITU process, which is looking for inputs. And also the CSTD has its process for contributing comments. I think it's open until the end of March, if I remember correctly. So there are those two mechanisms. But I think this is very much, as with the UK chapter, this is very much discussing these issues and the opportunities for engagement with our colleagues and with Nigel and others, and seeing what we can do together in that regard. I don't know, Nigel, putting it back to you.
Well, I fully agree. Really, governments, unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, have a key role here especially when it gets to the negotiating table. But we also have a role before that in terms of listening to what our communities are saying. And we have mechanisms in the UK. Paul Baker, as head of internet governance in the department, has set up processes which have evolved over the years. We have consultation mechanisms, and we would encourage, obviously, other communities to have those as well. And it is through engaging, really, that we enhance the mechanisms. We certainly weren't happy either about some of the processes in the GDC, especially in the latter stages. It started well with a lot of those fairly long briefing sessions, but it certainly didn't end very well. So hopefully the WSIS will be a lot better than that. I mean, the high-level forum, which I think Desiree mentioned, could be very important in July, in that the one thing Matthew might have said is that part of this UN process with the WSIS Plus 20 is the appointment of co-facilitators. So these are ambassadors in New York, typically for various countries. Usually an ambassador for the Global South or the Global North is chosen, i.e. one for each reason, but regional, it doesn't have to be that. They have a role, if you like, of trying to get the sense of the room, trying to get a feel of the room. But more than the room, they go to conferences, they initiate, hopefully, stakeholder sessions and try and get a feel for what people are thinking on these issues before the zero draft comes out, which is the sort of baseline sort of resolution that will come out next year at some point.
Just really a brief point to the sort of question that was asked about effectively reflect on the UK's position. I wonder whether there's an opportunity to have a sort of the UK in the first half of next year. I know we've only just had one, which certainly I couldn't make, because it was the IGF meeting. But I wonder if that might be helpful to provide some multi-stakeholder input to sort of the UK government and others prior to the next IGF in Norway in June, and as input to some of the various other fora that have been mentioned already. So I don't know if that would be helpful for whether it's for the UK chapter or indeed other stakeholders to participate in a more focused discussion in the next few months.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, then, so the chapter, of course, is involved with the UK IGF organizing committee. We haven't had the debrief yet. I think it's in a few days' time. Hopefully there'll be a debrief. I know Alicia from Nominates is writing the reports of what happened this year. And I think everyone is well aware that there's going to be a very crunched schedule for preparation. And obviously a UK IGF prior to the global IGF would probably be what needs to happen. But I don't think any decision has been made so far. Everyone's probably just getting very worried about it, thinking how much work needs to be done in so little time.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion, Andrew, given the time. Sorry, I was just saying that I think given the complexity of organizing an IGF, a UK IGF, maybe that's possible or not. But I think that your point there about bringing UK stakeholders together to discuss what should be priority issues and what should be the concerns and opportunities that we can identify as a part of the WSIS 20 is a good one. And I think it's a timely suggestion.
I think maybe we can, maybe as a chapter, we can work with other stakeholders and maybe other organizations to perhaps arrange for this discussion to take place, whether it starts online and then continues to face meetings or meetings such as the one that we have now. Unfortunately, time is what we don't have. And already at the clock, and it's such an interesting discussion and topic. I think we could cover a lot more internet governance topics, but just this one, it needs a lot more than just 45 minutes or an hour. We've got the AGM coming up in a few minutes' time. We do have to end this current session. So I wanted to thank you, Matthew, and you for running this and hosting this. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.